Tonight we're going to turn our Bibles to Ezekiel chapter 38. And Lord willing, we're just going to do it small bits, not big bits. People have said, look, you got too much information, you go too long. So we'll try and keep it in short bits. And tonight is very much an introduction in the first 6 verses. But you'll see the coming war with Gog and Magog. Let me ask you, is there a World War III coming? Are you sure? When? Soon. 10 years? 20 years? 100 years? Who's it going to be between? Oh, Gog and Magog. Interesting. Well, we're going to have a look. And as we look at this, in chapters 38 and 39, we're going to delve into it. But it's not long before you find there's some of the most contentious and confusing chapters in the Bible, even among scholars. Believe it or not, scholars disagree about the meanings here. So it's not the easiest of topics, but we're going to do our best because we're dealing with who, why, when, and where questions. Who, why, where, and when questions. We hope to answer that over the whatever long it takes us to deal with it. But there are some things that we can be sure of. Chapter 38 and chapter 39 of Ezekiel are dealing with the land and its possessions. So far from 35 onwards, and particularly remember the dry bones, God is talking about the bones coming together with sinew and flesh and everything, talking about Israel coming together in the land. Now, they're, if you like zombies, because they haven't got the spirit, the breath of life in them yet, but that is going to take place. And then we come on to the land. Who does the land belong to? Whose land is it? God. People forget this, but it's God's land. And God can give it to whoever he wants, but he's promised through Abraham that this would be given to his people. Now, if you've been following me over, does anyone know how long we've been in Ezekiel? Yeah, biggest mobs. A long time. I mean, there's 48 chapters. We're in chapter 38, so it's been a while. But if you've been following me, you'll understand that as we've unpacked the book of Ezekiel, we would understand by now that God has a plan for the nation of Israel. He hasn't abandoned them. He hasn't finished with them. And as I've said before, it's about a physical people. It's about a physical place in a real time. It has nothing to do with a spiritual people or a spiritual kingdom, and it is not referring to the church. And I don't care how clever you are, you will not be able to do spiritual gymnastics to make the church fit in these passages. It doesn't work. So it's dealing with a literal place called Israel, with a literal people called Israel. And God has a plan not only for Israel, but he also has a plan for Israel's enemies, the nations around about him, particularly from ancient times. And what we're told in these chapters, God's not only going to use them, but he's going to judge them as well. Now, there have been partial fulfillments in some of the prophecies of Ezekiel, but there are others that are still waiting to be fulfilled at a particular time. None of the verses that we have here in chapters 38 and 39 have ever been fulfilled in the history of Israel's existence. They have not been fulfilled. Now, I will back that up, not tonight, but as we go through, when people say, oh, that was in the time of Esther, that was in the time of such and such. Well, we're going to look at that and see whether it fits. And I can tell you, it doesn't. It doesn't even come close, but I'll leave that for another time. The first thing we're going to look at is we're going to try and identify the invaders. I call them the invaders because that's what they are. Now, this prophecy is looking for fulfillment in the latter days or the end times. And this seems to be getting closer and closer in the days in which we live. If we are in tune, we're starting to see prophecy unfold. We're starting to see nations. We're starting to see some of the things that the Bible talked about actually happening in our day. And we can actually see the lead up to what can transpire in the time of Jacob's trouble. Now, there's been much speculation about the identity of these nations. We need to keep in mind the boundaries that are describing. It's talking about people. It's talking about ethnic groups of people that were known at that time. And that's what we've got to keep in mind when we're dealing with Bible prophecy. We're dealing with real people who lived at that time. And with all things, over a period of time, people change, places change, names change. Now, I grew up in a place called Blacktown, Sleepy Little Hole, way back. But now, it's a concrete jungle. It changed from when I grew up. You could go over the bridge there and shoot rabbits. You can't go over the bridge and shoot anything now. It's wall-to-wall concrete. It's wall-to-wall homes as far as it can see. There are highways. There are this. There is that. It's changed. And there's different people there. The people groups that were there when I was growing up, they've all changed. It's all different from what it was. It means that people have moved out or moved further away. I've moved from Blacktown to Darwin. That was a dramatic change. It's different. But I have moved. And the same happens here. The names changed. Now, one of the criticisms that we have from many scholars and many people is that Russia does not exist. And it didn't exist in Ezekiel's day. Yet in prophecy, we say, yes, it is Russia that it's speaking about. Now, I will show you how that's come about very shortly. And Russia is a modern name that was given in the 1800s to the nation that we know it as today. But there were Russians before that, but they weren't called Russians. They were called something else that we will look at. And, it was unknown to the Bible prophets, but it covers the same ancient ethnic people of that day. They have descendants and descendants. Now, do you know where your descendants came from? Have you done your family tree? How many of you came from convict stock? Oh, come on. You're all freeborn, you're goody-goodies. You mean I was the only criminal? I'm sure we've traced back a lot of our heritage and our descendants, and we can trace back to where they've come from, but we've moved on. And today we're going to see where those ancient ethnic groups came from and roughly those areas that we have that we understand today. Now, how do we go about understanding the identity of these invaders? Where do we go? How do we decide where they came from? Did they all start in a common place? Silence. What do you reckon? Help me. Okay, I'll help you. The first thing that we need to do is understand this. We go to the Table of Nations in Genesis chapter 10. And you'll notice anything about this group of people? We have Noah up here. We have his sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Now, from those three sons, we have all the nations or ethnic backgrounds from the whole world can be traced to one of those three sons. Now, you'll notice here, in particular, you'll see here this Japheth. If we go down here, can we see his sons' names? Tubal, Meshach, Tyrus. Oh, there's some familiar names. Gomer, Magog, Togarmah, Ashkenaz, Javan, and so on. These names sound familiar? In chapter 38, who's it talking about? Japheth's sons and where they went to. And we got to keep that in mind. And I start with Genesis 10 because after the flood, the worldwide flood that the Bible talks about, how many people were there alive on earth? 8 people, which comprised of
Noah and his wives, Ham, Shem, and Japheth, and their
wives. So here we've got 8 people that survived after the worldwide flood destroyed absolutely everything. Now, they were in an ark. Where did that ark settle? Don't tell me there's contention over where it was. Some will say Mount Ararat, which is in Turkey. Can we prove it? No. There's a lot of conjecture. But we're going to have a look. You see, when the flood subsided, the ark rested on land, and Noah and his family left the ark, and where did they go? Did they all stay together? Where do you think they went? And this is important for us to know, because in this chart, it's more like you can get an idea of Noah's sons and where they went out from the ark. So you've got Europe over this side, the sons of Japheth, and you'll notice Gomer, Tyrus, they're all his sons. Javan, Meshach, Tarshish, Tubal, Asherah, Aram, Madam, Togarmah, Magog, Meshach, and you'll see how they've all spread out. So they didn't stay in the one area, and it's important we understand that they spread out. They went to all different parts, and we need to understand that all these names here, they started with Noah's sons, and they spread, their descendants spread far and wide, and some of those names we have in Ezekiel chapter 38. Now, we have the person, I don't think I put that up. No, we don't, that's another one. But the first thing I've called it is the person in verses 1 and 2. The Lord's message came to me, Son of man, turn toward Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, prophesy against them. Our first 2 verses, they give us an understanding. It goes back to the ancient ethnic people from Noah's time. These are Noah's sons, where they spread out. And Ezekiel has given this message to present to a person named Gog. Now, is Gog a land or is he a person? What does the scripture say? A chieftain or a prince of the land of Magog. So it's addressed to a leader, it's addressed to a chieftain, in other words, over these particular tribes. It's not to a land, it's to a chieftain who's in charge of this. Now, immediately the question arises, where is Magog then? And who could its leader possibly be? What is the identity of this northern nation that one day will combine forces with others to invade the nation of Israel in the end times. Now let me say this. There's a lot of contention among scholars about the identity of that nation. And I believe that you cannot be 100% dogmatic about it. But we do get a number of clues about these nations from the scriptures themselves. And I'll put this up. There's that little worksheet. You probably won't be able to see it, but you can see it here. I want you to see up on this particular illustration, can you see where we've got Russia or Magog up here? And where is little old Israel? It's here. This little speck here. Now if I stand in the middle of Israel here and I go directly north to the uttermost parts of the north, where would it take me? That's where it will take me. I just want you to keep that in mind for a little while as we look at it. Because Ezekiel provides us with some geographical evidence by saying the invader will come from the north. In 38 verse 6 it says they are joined by Gomer with all its troops and by Beth Togarmah from the remote parts of the north with all its troops. Many peoples are with you. Then we go down to verse 15. And come from your place from the remote parts of the north. The actual Hebrew says the uttermost parts of the north. The uttermost parts of the north. You and many peoples with you, all of them riding on horses, a great company and a vast army. Then in chapter 39 verse 2, I will turn you around and drag you along. I will lead you up from the remotest parts of the north and bring you against the mountains of Israel. Does that give us any identity? If I stand in the middle of Israel and look north, what's the uttermost part that I can look at? No. The uttermost parts that I can look at are up here. Here we are here, and I look as far as north as I can. I go up through these countries, up through Turkey, but I go further. The uttermost parts are to the north. And if you look at a map of Israel, it shows north. There's only one possibility, and that's Russia. Now, can I go further north than Russia? If I go further north than Russia, where will I end up in? In the Arctic. You think that's what it's talking about? No, it's talking about the uttermost parts of the north, which geographically is Russia and the Russian Federation. So please keep that in mind. There's no other country north of Israel at the uttermost part of the globe except the Russian Federation. Now, the people of Japheth, this is another one, that just shows you, I want you to see this, is that some of the names that we have that we'll be reminded of here in chapter 38 and chapter 39, we see Magog, we see Gomer, we see Meshech, Tubal, Togarmah, and we see Gomer down here as well. They did spread out in different parts in Javan. But I want you to notice which two seas are they close to? This one? The Black Sea? And this one? Caspian Sea. And we're going to see how those areas are close to the Russian Federation. That's where most of Japheth's descendants came from. And that's important that we understand it. The historical evidence that I referred to in Genesis 10:2, the sons of Japheth were Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshech, and Tyrus. The sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan were Elisha, Tarshish, the Kittim, and the Dodanim. From these, the coastlines of the nations were separated into their lands, everyone according to its language, according to their families, by their nations. So they spread out. They took different ones, some on the coastlines of the Caspian Sea, some on the Black Sea. But around this area is where we see the descendants of Japheth as they settled. Now their names would change over time, but their ancestry is from Japheth. Now, we also have from history that Josephus tells us a few interesting things as well. Now I want you to see here, there's some interesting things that appear on this one. You'll see this here, Scythian migration route. We also see the Persian Empire, and this is going right back, and you see the Caucasus Mountains that are here as well. They're very important. You'll notice the Black Sea, you'll notice the Caspian Sea as well. And Josephus, a first century historian, tells us that the descendants of Magog migrated to an area north of Israel. Herodotus, a 5th century BC historian, tells us that Meshech's descendants settled north of Israel. And Jerome, one of the early church fathers, from AD 345 to AD 420, tells us that Magog was in the Caucasian Mountains, which we know are in Russia. These mountains go from the Caspian Sea to the Black Sea. The historians also associate Magog with the Scythian race of people who lived in the vicinity of both the Caspian and Black Sea around these mountains. So here we've got the mountains here. Here we've got the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea here. And so here's the Scythians, and you can see where they travelled and their areas of origin. And that's important that we understand that. Now, another map. I guess this is a geographical lesson in some respects, because I read these things and I think, now where is it? I have no idea. And by human nature, we're lazy people. Let the pastor tell us or show us, but I don't want to look myself. Have a look at it. And it's good. This is why I'm spending some time so that we can actually get an idea and feel for these nations. Now we have geographical evidence and historical evidence to show the origins of this invader from the north. And we also have linguistic evidence to complete the picture of these people. Now it's important that, the Caucasian Mountains, where are they? We read about it. Where are they? You see, you've got the Black Sea here, you've got the Caspian Sea here, and here's this huge mountain range. Goes all up there. Now what's up here? Russian Federation of Nations. Now, you have Georgia. Now, was that a Russian state? Or part of the Russian Federation? Were these ones part of it as well? And Armenia? Think about it. They're part of the USSR. But they broke away to become independent states. But they're still affiliated to the north. And when we read the Caucasian Mountains, it's not just a little mountain range. You see how it goes from one to the Black Sea to the Caspian Sea. It's quite a large area where a lot of people lived and settled. Now, the Greek writers used to call the people of Meshech Muskii. The Assyrian records refer to them as Mushkai. the old Russian name was Muscovy, and all similar names are given to the Russian Federation people. So I've heard it, people call them Muscovites, and you know, what does that actually say? If you're a Muscovite, what have you been labelled as? Muscovite. Yeah, but where? Where do Muscovites come from? From the Russian Federation states. So there's that, if you like, that linguistic evidence to show justification why it can be from the north. Now these people migrated and settled in the area of Armenia, which is on the border of Turkey and the border of Iran and the border of Russia. Now I think the next one shows this, but you can sort of get an idea here. Here's Armenia here, and here's Iran, and Turkey's over this way. But I think the next one might show it a bit better. This gives you a much bigger picture of the situation. You've got the Russia up here. Here's these mountain ranges here going up here. You've got Georgia, Armenia, which we've just spoken about, and then you see the border here. It's Turkey. Border here, Iran. So it gives you an idea. It's just to give you the idea of where this is taking place. And the same writers tell us that Tubal was in the central part of Turkey, and west of that is Togarmah, which I think the next picture, yeah, this picture here shows it. Excuse me. So here you've got Togarmah, you've got Gomer, you've got Tubal, and this makes up, if you like, you see how this is Turkey, but here are these ethnic places that, well, it wasn't called Turkey in those days, but you can see the geographical location of where these people lived. Now, the whole point that we need to remember when we're looking here at the origins of these people, they were descendants of Noah. Magog was his grandson, and they migrated and settled along the Caucasian mountains, be it in Turkey, be it in Ukraine, be it in the bottom part of Russia or Armenia. This, though, will be the origin of the invaders when they come from the north to Israel. And that's the most important thing. These are the immediate neighbours that are surrounding Israel that come from the north. Now it's interesting that Ezekiel is told to address the prince or chieftain of Gog. Now, it's interesting as we pay attention. If we look at this picture here of Turkey, does that ring any bells for us about who the predominant leader is in the world who's making his moves? Does anyone remember? You don't keep up much. No. Aragon. Well, same thing. He's President Aragon. And he has visions and he has ambitions to make Turkey a world power just as it once was under the Ottoman Empire. He has these ambitions to make Turkey great again, and he wants to be the power that leads it. And he is making his name among the nations of the world. Now, I'm not saying that he will be, but all I'm saying is, as we pay attention to the world in which we live, things are happening. There are people that are rising up and taking positions in these ancient cities or ancient people's origins that are going to make a difference in the world. And people say, oh, well, look, you know, China is going to do this. The hot spot in the world is always going to be around Israel and its neighbours. Always. And that's where this war of Gog and Magog's going to happen. And it's going to drag a lot of other nations into it. Now, is it the Armageddon that it talks about in Revelation? No. But it could be. But it's not. That's for another time. I'll show you the difference between what's here in 38 and 39 and what the difference is in Revelation. But it's just to keep in mind that here's a man who's risen to the political arena, who's making a name for himself on the world stage, and he's intent on promoting the Islamic faith in Turkey in the world. And he's one that we need to watch in the coming days. That name will become clearer and clearer. Now, have I bored you with the geographical? No. It's important because I'm thinking, where are these places? Where did you come from? And if you're going to look at it, you need to understand the background and where it came from. Now, yes. Who? The English name. Well, you want to jump ahead. Just hang on, all right? We'll get there. So far, I just wanted to give you the idea of identifying those in the northern uttermost areas. That's what the Bible speaks about. And then it names Gog and Magog, etc. Now, the plan. In verses 3 and 4, wow. Should I still keep going or should I cut it here? All right. I just want you to tell me, I get carried away sometimes, and say, this is what the Sovereign Lord says. Look, I'm against you, Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I'll turn you around, put hooks in your jaws, and bring you out with all your army, horses and horsemen, all of them fully armed, a great company with shields of different types, all of them armed with swords. Now, this is quite a statement that has been made. God says to this leader and to the people under him, I'm against you, but I'm going to use you against my people Israel. And then I'll deal with you in such a way that the nations of the world will have no doubt as to who controls the events of this world. Now, I believe our world is being prepared for this future invasion today, with many of Israel's enemies taking political advantages to isolate her from any help and support from other nations. That's happening in our day. They're seeking to isolate her. One day, all the rhetoric will stop and action will take place just as God had said to these nations. And we can only see the rise of anti-Semitism. It's increasing daily. And it's among the nations that have been mentioned here. Now, as much as the prince of these nations tries to resist the pull of all-out war against Israel, he'll be dragged into it. You see, God's the one that's orchestrating this battle. It's according to his timetable, not that of Gog or the nations. And he will bring them against his land and his people. Now, everyone will know who's responsible for it taking place. All of Gog's armies, with all their weapons, will be utilised in this battle. Some have estimated that there are some 60 million people who will be part of this invasion process. Think about it. 60 million people coming against you from your backyard. That would be enough to frighten you. But, you know, that's an awful lot. Now, also need to understand that many of Russia and her confederates or allies have uranium enrichment plants. So they have the capability of making and using nuclear weapons. Our text speaks of the use of fire and brimstone, as well as earthquakes, which results in the destruction of the invading forces in areas in which they live, could be referring to a nuclear explosion. It fits. Now, Ezekiel would have no idea what a nuclear explosion was. They didn't have them. but today we do. Now, Strong's Concordance gives several Hebrew words for weaponry, such as arrows, chariots, and horsemen. The word for horseman in Hebrew is paresh, and it means a steed as stretched out to a vehicle. And collectively, the use of cavalry is used to describe our modern-day mechanised armoured vehicles. So you just need to understand what that word means. Arrows is the word in Hebrew chetz, and it's viewed as a military missile shot from a bow. So does it bring to idea the missiles, guided missiles, are like a weapon, an arrow? The word for chariots is merkiva, and it's referring to military tanks. And it's interesting that the Israeli army has named their tanks Merkiva. The point is, God will assemble these people with all their weaponry and might against Israel in the latter days. Now, shall I still go on? I'll try and be quick. Well, the next one is, if I can get it to go, the participants. Persia, Ethiopia, and Put are with them, all of them with shield and helmets. They are joined by Gomer with all its troops, and by Beth Togarmah from the remote parts of the north with all its troops. Many peoples are with you. So if you understood what I went through in the beginning, it gives you an idea from the north. It's not just some of these people, it's all peoples with you from the north, the uttermost parts. So while we have identified the main invader, we need to understand that the leader or prince has made alliances with a number of nations who clearly endorse his position and endorse his standing and will join him in his quest to conquer the nation of Israel and take the land. The nations that are listed, well, maybe, there we go. Just so that you can get an idea. The nations make up the Northern Confederacy to invade Israel. They are identified as Persia, Ethiopia, Libya, Gomer, and the house of Togarmah. And you can get some idea just from this map. I was looking for an exact one, but it's pretty hard to find exactly one unless you draw it up yourself. But we know Persia today is called Iran, modern Iran. Ethiopia could encompass the North African nations, meaning Kush or Put, or modern Sudan. Then we have Libya and Egypt. No one was 100% sure of Gomer. The Jewish Talmud equates it with our modern day Germany, or what used to be known as East Germany. In ancient times, Gomer and his descendants migrated over the Caucasian mountains to the north of Israel. Gomer could well be Germany, maybe the southern tip of Russia. It could be the central part of Turkey beside the Black Sea. Verse 6, we're introduced to the house of Togarmah, which possibly relates to southern Russia, corresponding to the Cossacks and part of Turkey. Now, don't laugh, I got this, and it must be true, from the CIA. You don't believe me? Have a look down there, the CIA Facebook. So it must be right. All right, but if you look at the map here, it provides us with information regarding these nations that we mentioned. And what do you notice about it? You know, here's little old Israel, surrounded by Muslim. That's an awful place to be in, isn't it? And your neighbours don't like you at all. And they've made it known. But they'll take every opportunity to deal with her in that way. Now, I know I've spent a great deal of time setting foundations to follow what is to follow. Now, there may be some difference in opinion to the origins of these nations, but the point here is this invasion will be from the north by a coalition of forces who hate Israel and want to see her demise in the latter days. It's just to give you an understanding. When we read these names, they are people. They're from an ethnic origin from Noah's sons Japheth. And where they came from is important. And their descendants are alive today. So we'll leave it there. And hopefully you won't be too bad, too late.